A chill wind swept across the plains of Sweetwater Creek, Texas, as Josephine Blackett wiped the sweat from her brow. The year was 1878, and the summer heat made the horizon shimmer like a mirage. Josephine, known to most as Josie, had arrived in this dusty frontier town just 3 days prior, clutching little more than the clothes on her back and her late grandmother's silver hairbrush. The stagecoach had dropped her at the edge of what passed for civilization, leaving her to forge a new beginning far from the crowded streets of Boston, where scandal had threatened to consume her. Miss Blackett, Mrs. Holbrook, the innkeeper's wife, called from the doorway of the modest boarding house. "There's a position opened up at the schoolhouse. Thought you might want to know, what with your education and all." Josie turned, adjusting her simple blue dress as she smiled at the older woman. "Thank you kindly. I'll inquire first thing tomorrow." The next morning dawned bright and clear as Josie made her way to the small white schoolhouse at the edge of town. The building stood as a lonely sentinel of learning and refinement in this rough, hewn landscape. She smoothed her hair, took a deep breath, and knocked on the door. The town council's representative, Mr. Peterson, was a balding man with spectacles perched precariously on his nose. "We're desperate for someone with learning," he explained after a brief interview. "Our last teacher left when she married a cattle baron from up north." "I can start immediately," Josie offered, trying to hide her relief. Her savings were meager, and the prospect of steady employment felt like a blessing from above. Then it settled. "You'll begin Monday with 15 pupils, ages 6 to 13. By the time Monday morning arrived, word had spread throughout the small community that the new schoolteacher was a refined Eastern woman with porcelain skin and auburn hair that caught the sunlight like polished copper. What they didn't know, what Josie prayed would never reach these parts, was that she had fled Boston following the discovery of her fiancé's embezzlement and subsequent suicide, leaving her reputation tarnished by association. The schoolroom filled with curious children, their eyes wide as they assessed their new teacher. Josie wrote her name on the blackboard in careful script and turned to face her class with a warm smile. "Good morning, children. I'm Miss Blackett, and I'm honored to be your new teacher." As the weeks passed, Josie found herself settling into a rhythm. Each morning, she would rise before dawn, prepare for the day's lessons, and walk the quarter-mile to the schoolhouse. The children responded well to her gentle but firm guidance, and she discovered that teaching brought her a sense of purpose she had never known in Boston's drawing rooms. It was during the 3rd week of her tenure that she first encountered Quentin O'Malley. She had dismissed her students for the day and was gathering her belongings when the schoolhouse door creaked open. A tall man with broad shoulders and sun-weathered skin stepped inside, removing his hat to reveal dark hair threaded with silver at the temples. Beside him stood a boy of perhaps 7 or 8, his eyes a striking blue against his tanned face. "Miss Blackett." The man's voice was deep, carrying the slight rasp of one accustomed to giving orders across wide-open spaces. "Yes, that's me." She straightened, instinctively smoothing her skirts. "I'm Quentin O'Malley. This here's my boy, Samuel." He placed a protective hand on the child's shoulder. "We've just moved to the area. Bought the old Thornton place about 5 miles west." The boy, Samuel, shuffled his feet, looking everywhere but at Josie. "He needs schooling," Mr. O'Malley continued. "His ma died of fever 2 years back, and we've been moving around some. Reckon it's time he had some proper learning." Josie smiled at the boy. "We'd be delighted to have you join us, Samuel. We're working on our multiplication tables and reading Robinson Crusoe. Do you like adventure stories?" Samuel gave a non-committal shrug, but Josie caught a flash of interest in his eyes. "He reads some," Mr. O'Malley said. "His mother taught him his letters before she passed. I've done what I can, but—" He trailed off, and Josie recognized the familiar struggle of a parent wanting better for their child than they could provide themselves. "Well, I'll make sure he catches up quickly," Josie assured him. "Will he be able to start tomorrow?" Mr. O'Malley nodded. "I'll bring him by myself. Got some supplies to pick up in town anyway." As they turned to leave, Josie called out, "It was nice to meet you both. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow, Samuel." The boy glanced back, his expression solemn. Mr. O'Malley touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement before guiding his son out the door. That evening, as Josie prepared for bed in her small rented room, she found herself thinking about the O'Malleys. There was something in Quentin O'Malley's direct gaze that had unsettled her, not in an unpleasant way, but in a manner that made her acutely aware of herself as a woman, not just as a teacher. She dismissed the thought as quickly as it came. Her purpose here was to build a new life, not to entangle herself with a widower and his son, no matter how intriguing they might be. Samuel began attending school the next day. He was quiet but intelligent, quickly proving himself capable in arithmetic and spelling. What he lacked was confidence, something Josie recognized as the result of frequent moves and the absence of a mother's nurturing presence. She made a special effort to draw him out, praising his work and encouraging him to share his thoughts during class discussions. 2 weeks after Samuel joined her class, Josie was walking home when she spotted him sitting alone by the creek that gave the town its name. His shoulders were hunched, and even from a distance, she could tell he was upset. "Samuel?" she called softly as she approached. "Is everything all right?" He quickly wiped his face with his sleeve. "Yes, madam." Josie sat beside him on the grassy bank, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "It's a beautiful spot, isn't it? I come here sometimes to think." Samuel nodded, picking at a blade of grass. "Would you like to tell me what's troubling you? Sometimes sharing a burden makes it lighter." For a long moment, he remained silent. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "Today's my ma's birthday. Pa doesn't know I remember, but I do." Josie's heart ached for him. "And you miss her very much?" "Yes, madam." His lower lip trembled. "Pa tries, but it's not the same. And the other boys make fun because I don't have a mother to bake cookies or sew patches on my clothes. I'm very sorry about that, Samuel. It's not right for them to tease you." She paused, considering her next words carefully. "You know, I lost my parents when I was not much older than you. My grandmother raised me." Samuel looked up, genuine interest in his eyes. "Really? What happened to them?" "They were on a ship that sank during a storm. I went to live with my grandmother after that." "Do you still miss them?" "Yes, every day. But in time, the pain becomes less sharp. And we carry the people we love in our hearts, always." She smiled gently at him. "Would you like to tell me about your mother? What do you remember most about her?" And so they sat by the creek as Samuel shared memories of his mother, her singing as she worked, the stories she told at bedtime, the way she could calm his father with just a touch when he was angry. Josie listened, offering nothing but her presence and understanding, until the shadows grew long across the water. "We should head back," she said finally. "Your father will be worried. He's still in town, trading with the mercantile." Samuel stood, brushing grass from his trousers. "Our farm is just over that rise." He pointed westward. "Then I'll walk with you part of the way," Josie offered. They walked in companionable silence, the late afternoon sun casting their shadows long across the dusty path. As they crested a small hill, a modest farmhouse came into view, smoke curling from its chimney. "That's our place," Samuel said, his voice lighter than it had been by the creek. "Pa's fixing it up. Says we're staying put this time." "It looks like a fine home," Josie observed. A figure emerged from the barn, Quentin O'Malley, leading a chestnut horse. He paused when he spotted them, raising a hand in greeting before walking to meet them. "Miss Blackett," he said, surprise evident in his tone. "What brings you out this way?" "I found Samuel by the creek and thought I'd walk with him part way home," she explained. She glanced at the boy. "We had a good talk." Quentin's expression softened as he looked at his son. "That's so? Well, I appreciate your kindness, Miss Blackett. It was no trouble at all." She smiled at Samuel. "I'll see you tomorrow at school?" He nodded, something of a smile tugging at his lips. "Yes, madam." As she turned to leave, Quentin cleared his throat. "It's nearly supper time, Miss Blackett. We don't have much, but you're welcome to join us. Least I can do to thank you for looking out for my boy." The invitation surprised her. "Oh, I couldn't impose. It's no imposition," he insisted. Besides, it'd be nice for Samuel to have company beyond his old man for a change. Josie hesitated, aware of the impropriety of dining alone with a man she barely knew. But Samuel's hopeful expression decided her. "Very well, thank you. I'd be pleased to join you." The inside of the O'Malley home was sparsely furnished but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a wooden table and chairs occupying the center of the main room. Shelves held a surprising number of books, more than Josie would have expected in a cowboy's home. "You like to read?" she asked, running her fingers along the spines. Quentin nodded as he moved about the kitchen area. My father was a schoolteacher back east. He believed in education, even for those of us who preferred horses to classrooms. Pa reads to me every night, Samuel offered, setting the table with mismatched plates. Even when we're tired from working. Quentin gave his son a fond look. Man's gotta have priorities. The meal was simple beans, cornbread, and venison, but flavorful. Conversation flowed more easily than Josie had anticipated, with Samuel speaking more than she'd ever heard him at school. Quentin proved to be well informed about current events, even in their remote location, and they discussed everything from territorial politics to the latest dime novels. As twilight deepened outside the windows, Samuel asked, "Can we show Miss Blackett the Fireflies, Pa? They should be coming out soon." Quentin checked the clock on the mantel. "I suppose we could, if Miss Blackett doesn't mind delaying her return to town a bit longer." "I'd love to see them," Josie said, realizing with some surprise that she was reluctant for the evening to end. They stepped outside into the gathering darkness. The air had cooled, and Josie wrapped her shawl more tightly around her shoulders. The first stars were appearing overhead, diamonds scattered across black velvet. "Look!" Samuel pointed excitedly as a small light blinked in the darkness near the edge of the yard. Then another appeared, and another, until dozens of tiny lights were floating through the night air. "They're beautiful," Josie breathed. "Pa says they're like little lanterns lit by fairies," Samuel said, his eyes wide with wonder. Quentin chuckled. "That was your mother's story, son. Have you ever caught one, Samuel?" Josie asked. He shook his head. "I tried last summer, but they're too quick for me." "Well, let's see if we can catch one together." She held out her hand to him. "Come on." With childlike enthusiasm, Samuel took her hand, leading her toward a cluster of lights hovering near a stand of tall grass. Josie moved slowly, showing him how to cup his hands gently around a firefly without crushing it. "Like this," she whispered, guiding his small hands. "Slowly now." For nearly half an hour, they chased the glowing insects, with Quentin watching from the porch steps. Finally, with a triumphant laugh, Samuel captured one, holding his cupped hands toward Josie. "I got one. Look, Miss Blackett." She leaned close, peering between his fingers at the tiny light blinking inside. "You did it. Well done." Samuel's face was alight with a joy she had never seen there before. He turned to his father. "Pa, I caught one." Quentin crossed the yard to them, his expression soft in the moonlight. "So you did. Your ma would be proud." Samuel looked back at his prize, then carefully opened his hands. The firefly hesitated for a moment, then flew upward, its light joining the others in the night sky. "Why did you let it go?" Josie asked gently. "Because it belongs with its family," the boy replied simply. "And it needs to be free to fly." Josie felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "That's very wise, Samuel." The boy looked up at her, then at his father. "Miss Blackett helped me catch it, Pa. She showed me how to be patient and gentle." Quentin's gaze met Josie's over his son's head, something warm and appreciative in his eyes. "You're better than wishes, Miss Blackett," he said softly. "Most folks just hope for good things. You make them happen." The simple compliment touched her deeply, and for a moment, she couldn't find words to respond. Thank you, Mr. O'Malley." "Quentin," he corrected. "Out here, formality seems a waste of breath." "Josie, then," she offered in return. Samuel yawned widely, breaking the moment. Quentin laughed. "Time for bed, son. Say good night to Miss Blackett." "Good night, Miss Blackett," the boy said dutifully. "Thank you for helping me catch the firefly." "You're very welcome, Samuel. I'll see you at school tomorrow." After Samuel had gone inside, Quentin said, "I should get you back to town. It's not proper for you to be out here after dark." "Of course." Josie suddenly remembered her position as the town's schoolteacher and the expectations that came with it. "I've imposed on your hospitality far too long already." "It wasn't an imposition," he said quietly. "It was the nicest evening we've had in this house." He hitched a horse to a small buggy, and they rode back to Sweetwater Creek in comfortable silence, the night air cool around them. When they reached the boarding house, he helped her down, his hands strong and sure at her waist. "Thank you for your kindness to Samuel," he said as she stood on the bottom step, bringing them nearly eye to eye. "It means more than I can say." "He's a wonderful boy," Josie replied sincerely. "You should be very proud." I am. He hesitated, then added, perhaps you might join us again sometime. For supper or Sunday dinner, maybe. The invitation shouldn't have made her heart beat faster, but it did. I'd like that. He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture both courtly and cowboy-like. Good night, Josie. Good night, Quentin. As she watched him drive away, Josie knew something had changed. In this unexpected encounter with a quiet cowboy and his solemn son, she had found something she hadn't known. She was missing a connection, a sense of belonging. Whether it would lead anywhere remained to be seen, but for the first time since arriving in Sweetwater Creek, she felt truly hopeful about her future here. The following weeks brought a subtle but definite shift in Josie's life. Samuel began to blossom in school, raising his hand more often and even making a few friends among his classmates. Quentin made a point of attending the school's Friday afternoon recitals, standing at the back of the room with his hat in his hands, his eyes fixed proudly on his son. And then there were the invitation Sunday dinners at the O'Malley farm, which Josie accepted despite the raised eyebrows of Mrs. Holbrook and the whispers that inevitably followed. She told herself it was for Samuel's sake, that the boy needed a woman's influence. But she couldn't deny the flutter in her chest whenever Quentin's hand brushed hers as he helped her from the buggy, or the way his rare smile transformed his weathered face. One Sunday in late summer, after a meal of chicken and dumplings that Josie had helped prepare, Samuel asked, "Can we go fishing, Pa? You promised last week." Quentin glanced at Josie. "Would you mind? The creek on our property has some decent trout." "I'd love to join you," she said. "Though I should warn you, I've never fished before." Samuel's eyes widened. "Never? But it's easy. I'll show you how." The creek was cool and clear, winding through a stand of cottonwoods that provided welcome shade from the August sun. Quentin carried 3 fishing poles, while Samuel bounded ahead, pointing out landmarks along the way. "That's where I saw a fox last spring," he called back. "And over there, Pa shot a deer that fed us all winter." They settled on a grassy bank, and Quentin showed Josie how to bait her hook with a worm. She tried not to flinch as the worm wriggled between her fingers. "You're doing fine," he assured her, his voice close to her ear. "Now just cast it out like this." He guided her arm in a gentle arc, and the line sailed out to land with a satisfying plop in the middle of the creek. "Now what?" she asked. "Now we wait." He settled beside her, casting his own line. Samuel had wandered a bit upstream, intent on a spot he claimed was full of the biggest fish. They sat in companionable silence, the only sounds the gurgle of the creek and the occasional call of a meadowlark. Josie felt herself relaxing, the tensions of maintaining her position as the town's respectable schoolteacher easing from her shoulders. "You seem different out here," Quentin observed after a while. "More yourself, somehow." She glanced at him, surprised by his perception. "Do I?" He nodded. "In town, you're always so contained. Like you're keeping a part of yourself hidden away." The observation was too accurate for comfort. "Perhaps I am," she admitted. "When one is in a position of responsibility, there are expectations to consider." "And what are those expectations keeping you from, I wonder?" His gaze was steady, interested rather than judgmental. Josie looked away, watching the ripples in the creek. "My past, for one thing. I came to Sweetwater Creek to start over, to leave behind certain difficulties. We all have things we'd rather leave behind," he said quietly. "Doesn't mean they don't shape who we are." She hesitated, then decided to trust him with a piece of her truth. "I was engaged, back in Boston, to a man who turned out to be not what he seemed. When his deceptions were discovered, he took his own life rather than face the consequences. The pain of that betrayal still stung, though less sharply now. I was innocent of any wrongdoing, but scandal doesn't care for innocence. It was better to make a fresh start somewhere my name meant nothing." Quentin was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Thank you for telling me. You're not shocked." "By what?" "That you were fooled by a man you trusted? That happens to the best of us." He reeled in his line, checked the bait, and cast again. "What matters is what you did after picked yourself up and made a new life. That takes courage." His simple acceptance warmed her more than she could express. "What about you?" she asked. "What brought you to Sweetwater Creek?" He squinted at the horizon. "After Mary Samuel's mother died, I couldn't stay in our old place. Too many memories. We drifted for a while, working cattle drives, ranch jobs. But that's no life for a boy. He glanced upriver to where Samuel was intently watching his line. When I heard about the Thornton place being for sale, it seemed like a sign. Good land, fair price, a town nearby with a school. He looked at her. Turned out to be a better decision than I knew at the time. The implication in his words made her cheeks warm. Before she could respond, Samuel's excited shout rang out. I got one. Pa, Miss Blackett, I caught a fish. They hurried to help him land his prize, a respectable-sized trout that thrashed and glistened in the sunlight. Quentin showed him how to remove the hook, his big hands gentle as they guided his son's smaller ones. We'll have this for supper tomorrow, he declared, placing the fish in a creel. Fine catch, son. Samuel beamed with pride, then turned to Josie. Did you see how big it was, Miss Blackett? I certainly did, she agreed. You're quite the fisherman. They fished until the shadows lengthened, with Samuel catching 2 more trout and Quentin landing a good-sized bass. Josie's line remained untouched, but she didn't mind. The peaceful afternoon spent in their company was reward enough. As they walked back to the house, Samuel running ahead with the creel, Quentin's hand found Josie's, his calloused fingers closing around hers. She looked up at him, startled but not displeased. Is this all right? He asked, his voice gruff with uncertainty. She nodded, her heart racing like a schoolgirl's. Yes, it's all right. They walked hand in hand the rest of the way, neither speaking, both aware that something significant had shifted between them. At the house, while Samuel cleaned his fish under Quentin's supervision, Josie prepared a simple supper from the remains of their midday meal. The domesticity of the scene struck her how natural it felt to move about this kitchen, to be part of this small family circle. It was dangerous to let herself imagine a future here, she knew. And yet, as they sat down to eat, with Samuel chattering about his fishing triumph and Quentin's eyes meeting hers across the table, she couldn't help but hope. After supper, as twilight gathered, they sat on the porch steps. Samuel, tired from his day's adventures, leaned against Josie's side, his eyes growing heavy. Tell us a story, Miss Blackett, he murmured. Like you do at school. What kind of story would you like? She asked, smoothing his hair from his forehead. One with adventure. And a happy ending. She smiled. I think I can manage that. As she spun a tale of brave knights and clever princesses, she was acutely aware of Quentin beside her, his shoulder touching hers, his attention divided between her words and her face. Samuel drifted off before the story's end, his head now heavy in her lap. I should get him to bed, Quentin said softly. He lifted his son with practiced ease, the boy barely stirring as he was carried inside. When Quentin returned, he sat closer than before, his presence warm in the cooling evening air. He's taken quite a shine to you, he said. Never seen him so comfortable with anyone since his mother died. He's easy to love, Josie replied, then blushed at her choice of words. Quentin's hand found hers again, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. And what about his father? He asked, his voice lower than before. Is he easy to love as well? Josie's breath caught. She looked up to find his eyes intent on hers, a vulnerability there she hadn't seen before. Quentin, I know it's too soon, he interrupted. I know you have your position to consider and a reputation to maintain. But I find myself thinking about you at the oddest moments when I'm mending fences or breaking horses or trying to decipher Samuel's arithmetic homework. A smile tugged at his mouth. You've gotten under my skin, Josephine Blackett. The honesty of his declaration touched her deeply. You've gotten under mine as well, she admitted. But you're right, there are complications. The school board would not look kindly on their teacher keeping company with a man, especially one she's not related to. Then we'll be discreet, he suggested. At least until we're sure of what's between us. And what do you think is between us? She asked, her heart pounding. His answer was to lean forward and brush his lips against hers, a kiss so gentle it was barely there, yet it sent warmth coursing through her entire being. Something worth exploring, he whispered against her mouth before drawing back. She touched her fingers to her lips, knowing she should object, should assert the propriety she had been so careful to maintain. Instead, she found herself saying, yes, I believe it is. The first cool winds of autumn brought change to Sweetwater Creek. The trees along the creek turned gold and crimson, the fields were harvested, and preparations for winter began in earnest. At the schoolhouse, Josie's students presented their harvest projects, pressed leaves, compositions about autumn, and arithmetic problems involving bushels and acres. Samuel O'Malley's project stood out, a carefully drawn map of his father's farm, showing the fields, the creek, the house, and even the spot where he had caught his first firefly. At the bottom, in his painstaking script, he had written, "Where I live now and forever." "This is beautiful work, Samuel," Josie told him as she examined the map. "Your father will be very proud." The boy beamed. "It's for you, Miss Blackett, so you can always find your way to us." His words, so innocent yet so laden with meaning, nearly brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you. I'll treasure it." Over the past weeks, she had indeed found her way to the O'Malley farm with increasing frequency. Sunday dinners had become a cherished tradition. There had been a harvest dance in the town hall, where Quentin had claimed 2 dances with her, enough to raise eyebrows, but not enough to cause outright scandal. And there had been quiet moments on the porch after Samuel was asleep, where whispered conversations and stolen kisses had deepened the connection between them. Josie knew she was walking a dangerous line. The school board had strict rules about the moral conduct of teachers, and while nothing improper had occurred between her and Quentin, the appearance of impropriety could be just as damaging. Yet she couldn't bring herself to end what had become the most meaningful relationship of her life. The matter came to a head in early November when Mrs. Peterson, the school board chairman's wife, stopped Josie after Sunday services. "Miss Blackett, might I have a word?" The older woman's expression was pinched with disapproval. "Of course, Mrs. Peterson." Josie's stomach tightened with apprehension. "There has been talk," Mrs. Peterson began, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, "about your frequent visits to the O'Malley farm. A young, unmarried woman spending so much time alone with a widower. It gives rise to speculation, you understand." Josie felt her cheeks burn. "I assure you, Mrs. Peterson, there has been nothing inappropriate in my interactions with Mr. O'Malley. I take my position as a role model for the children very seriously." "I'm certain you do," the woman replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. "However, perception is important in a small community like ours. The school board will be meeting next week to discuss the matter. I thought you should be prepared." As Mrs. Peterson walked away, Josie stood frozen, her carefully constructed new life suddenly threatened. She had known this moment might come, but facing it was another matter entirely. "Everything all right?" Quentin's voice behind her made her jump. He had attended the service with Samuel, sitting several pews behind her, as was their custom to avoid fueling gossip. "No," she admitted quietly. "We need to talk, but not here." His expression grew serious. "Come to dinner as planned. We'll talk after Samuel's in bed." The day seemed endless. Josie went through the motions of her Sunday routine, reading, preparing lessons for the week ahead, but her mind was consumed with worry. By the time Quentin arrived to collect her in his buggy, her nerves were stretched taut as fiddle strings. Dinner was a subdued affair, despite Samuel's cheerful chatter about a nest of rabbits he had discovered near the barn. Josie made an effort to engage with him, but Quentin noticed her distraction, his eyes questioning whenever they met hers across the table. After Samuel was tucked in bed, they sat before the fire, the usual comfort of the scene undercut by the tension between them. "Tell me what happened," Quentin said without preamble. Josie related her conversation with Mrs. Peterson, her hands twisting in her lap. "The board could dismiss me if they believe I've behaved inappropriately, and even if they don't, the damage to my reputation." She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. Quentin was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames. Then he said, "There's a simple solution." "Is there?" "Because I don't see one that doesn't involve giving up either my position or—" She hesitated. "Or me," he finished for her. "Unless we get married." The word hung in the air between them, unexpected and momentous. Josie stared at him, unsure she had heard correctly. "Married?" He turned to face her, his expression more vulnerable than she had ever seen it. "It's not how I planned to ask. I wanted it to be special, not forced by circumstance. But yes, Josie, I'm asking you to marry me." "Quentin, before you answer," he interrupted, taking her hands in his. "I want you to know this isn't just to save your reputation. I've been thinking about it for weeks. You've brought something into our lives, into my life, that I never thought to have again after Mary died. Joy, purpose, hope. His grip tightened. I love you, Josie. And I believe you feel something for me as well. Tears welled in her eyes. I do, she whispered. I love you both so much. But marriage is a serious step, and we've known each other such a short time. Some things you just know, he said simply. I knew the moment you helped Samuel catch that firefly, and he looked at you like you'd hung the moon. I knew when you told me about your past without flinching, expecting judgment, but facing it anyway. He reached up to brush a tear from her cheek. I know every time I kiss you and feel like I've come home after a long journey. His words touched her soul, breaking through the wall of caution she had built around her heart. Yes, she said, her voice stronger now. Yes, I'll marry you, Quentin. The joy that transformed his face was worth any risk, any sacrifice. He pulled her into his arms, his kiss conveying what words could not: the promise of a future together, the certainty of a love that had come unexpectedly but would endure. When they finally drew apart, breathless and smiling, Josie asked, when? And how do we tell Samuel? As soon as can be arranged, Quentin replied. And as for Samuel, he grinned, I think he'll be the happiest of all. He's been dropping hints for weeks about how nice it would be if you lived with us all the time. Josie laughed, relief and happiness bubbling up inside her. Has he now? Quite the matchmaker for a 7-year-old. 8 next month, Quentin corrected. And yes, he's been quite determined. Even asked Preacher Johnson how long it takes to arrange a wedding. The thought of Samuel planning their future together warmed her heart. Then we shouldn't disappoint him. They decided to tell Samuel in the morning and to approach the school board together before their scheduled meeting. Quentin would speak to Preacher Johnson about performing the ceremony as soon as possible, perhaps even the following weekend if the banns could be posted quickly enough. As Quentin drove her back to town that night, the stars overhead seemed brighter somehow, the future opening before them like a path of light. Are you sure? He asked as they neared the boarding house. It's not too late to change your mind. Josie leaned against his shoulder, certain in a way she had never been before. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Josie dressed with particular care, knowing this would be a day to remember. She had just finished pinning up her hair when a knock sounded at her door. Mrs. Holbrook stood there, her expression troubled. There's someone here to see you, Miss Blackett. A gentleman from Boston. Says he's your cousin? Josie frowned. My cousin? I don't have any cousins in Boston. He's quite insistent. Says it's a matter of some urgency. Bewildered and slightly uneasy, Josie followed Mrs. Holbrook downstairs to the small parlor. A man stood with his back to the door, looking out the window. He turned as she entered, and Josie felt the blood drain from her face. Hello, Josephine, said James Harrington, his handsome features arranged in a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It's been too long. James was not her cousin, but her former fiancé's business partner and the man who had orchestrated the embezzlement scheme that had ruined so many lives, including her own. He had managed to evade prosecution by fleeing the country, or so she had believed. What are you doing here? She demanded, her voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Holbrook, sensing the tension, hovered uncertainly in the doorway. Shall I bring some tea, Miss Blackett? No, thank you. Mr. Harrington won't be staying long. Josie kept her eyes fixed on James, her heart pounding with fear and anger. Once they were alone, James moved closer, his cologne too strong, too citified for this place overwhelming in the small room. Now, is that any way to greet an old friend? Especially one who's come all this way to find you. We were never friends, Josie replied coldly. And I would be quite happy if you had never found me. What do you want, James? He settled himself in an armchair, uninvited, crossing his legs with the casual arrogance she remembered all too well. I find myself in need of funds, my dear. The authorities in Boston have become rather tiresome about the whole banking affair, and I require capital to establish myself elsewhere. Mexico, perhaps. And what does that have to do with me? Everything. His smile turned predatory. You see, I have certain documents, letters, primarily that suggest you were more involved in our little enterprise than you claimed. Nothing definitive, of course, but enough to cast doubt on your innocence. Enough to ruin the respectable new life you've built here. Josie's hands clenched at her sides. That's a lie. I knew nothing of what you and Edward were doing. Perhaps not. But scandal, as you well know, doesn't concern itself with truth, only with appearance. He examined his fingernails with exaggerated interest. $500 should suffice. A small price for your continued peace of mind, wouldn't you say? The sum was astronomical, far more than she could possibly raise on a teacher's salary. I don't have that kind of money. Come now, Josephine. Your grandmother left you quite comfortably situated. Surely you haven't spent it all. Most of it went to repay Edward's victims, she snapped. Something you would know nothing about, conscience being a foreign concept to you. James's expression hardened. I'll give you 3 days to consider my offer. After that, I'll be forced to share what I know with the good people of Sweetwater Creek. He rose, adjusting his expensive coat. I'm staying at the hotel. Don't try anything foolish, like leaving town. I would find you again, and my terms would be considerably less generous. After he left, Josie sank onto the sofa, her mind racing. She had very little savings, certainly nowhere near $500. And even if she could somehow raise the money, there was no guarantee James wouldn't come back for more. Men like him were never satisfied. She was still sitting there, trying to make sense of this new threat, when another knock came at the door. This time it was Samuel, his face alight with excitement. Miss Blackett, Pa sent me to fetch you. He said it's important. The sight of the boy, so innocent and unaware of the shadow that had just fallen across their future, broke her heart. How could she tell Quentin about James's blackmail attempt? How could she risk bringing scandal not just on herself, but on him and Samuel as well? Tell your father I'll be there shortly, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. I need to attend to something first. Samuel nodded, though his expression turned quizzical. Are you all right? You look sad. I'm just tired, she assured him, forcing a smile. Go on now. I won't be long. After he left, Josie paced the small parlor, trying to formulate a plan. She could go to the sheriff, but without proof, it would be her word against James's. She could try to gather the money somehow, though it seemed impossible. Or she could disappear again before James could make good on his threat. The thought of leaving Quentin and Samuel was almost unbearable, but perhaps it was the only way to protect them. If she stayed and James exposed her supposed involvement in the embezzlement scheme, Quentin's reputation would suffer by association. Samuel would face ridicule and ostracism from children who repeated their parents' gossip. With a heavy heart, Josie made her decision. She would leave Sweetwater Creek that very night, before she could change her mind. She would write letters explaining as much as she could, one to the school board resigning her position, and one to Quentin, telling him the truth and begging his forgiveness for disappearing from their lives. She spent the afternoon in a daze, packing her few belongings and writing the letters with a hand that trembled so badly she had to start over several times. The stagecoach would pass through town at midnight, heading west. She would be on it, bound for California or Oregon, somewhere James Harrington would never think to look. As evening fell, she heard horses approaching the boarding house. Looking out her window, she saw Quentin dismounting, his expression worried. Samuel waited on his own pony, fidgeting impatiently. For a wild moment, she considered telling Quentin everything, throwing herself on his mercy and facing whatever came together. But as she watched him lift Samuel down from the saddle, she knew she couldn't drag them into her troubles. They deserved better than that. She moved away from the window, her decision hardening into resolve. She would not see them, would not risk wavering. Her letter would have to suffice. But as she turned back to her packing, she heard footsteps on the stairs, heavy, purposeful steps that could only belong to Quentin. Before she could hide the evidence of her plans, there was a knock at her door. Josie, are you in there? She closed her eyes, gathering her courage. Yes, she called. Just a moment. Quickly, she threw a shawl over her half-packed trunk and tucked the letters into her desk drawer. Then she opened the door. Quentin stood there, hat in hand, concern etched on his features. Samuel said you looked upset earlier. When you didn't come as promised, I got worried. I'm sorry, she said, not meeting his eyes. I was indisposed. His gaze moved past her to the room beyond, taking in details she hadn't managed to conceal: the empty spaces on her dresser, the wardrobe door standing ajar with gaps in the hanging garments. You're packing, he stated flatly. Why? Josie stepped back, allowing him to enter. There was no point in denying what was obvious. Something's happened. Someone from my past has found me. In halting sentences, she told him about James Harrington's visit and his blackmail attempt. He's threatening to destroy my reputation and, by extension, yours and Samuel's if we marry. Quentin listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each word. When she finished, he asked, "And your solution is to run away?" Without even telling me. "I was going to leave you a letter," she said weakly, knowing how inadequate it sounded. "I thought it would be easier." "Easier for whom?" he demanded. "Not for me. Watching Samuel's heart break when he realizes you're gone. Not for you. Alone again with no one to stand beside you." He took a step closer. "Is that really what you want, Josie? To spend your life running every time trouble finds you?" "Of course not. But what choice do I have? I can't pay James what he's asking, and I can't bear the thought of you and Samuel suffering because of my past." "We have a choice," Quentin said firmly. "We face this together. As a family." The word family broke through her despair like sunlight through storm clouds. "But how?" "James will carry out his threat. He's a vindictive man. Let him." Quentin reached for her hands, holding them tightly in his. "Do you think I care what some city swindler says about you? Do you think anyone who knows you would believe his lies? The school board can find another teacher if they're foolish enough to listen to a stranger over one of their own." He pulled her closer. "But I don't think it will come to that. Not if we act first." Something in his tone made her look up sharply. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking it's time this Harrington fellow learned that things work differently out here." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Where's Samuel?" "Downstairs with Mrs. Holbrook, I imagine." "What?" "Because we're getting married. Tonight." Josie blinked, certain she had misheard. "Tonight? But that's impossible. The banns haven't been posted. The Preacher Johnson owes me a favor. And as for the banns, we'll sort that out later." His eyes held hers, intense and determined. "Once you're my wife, Harrington will have no leverage. Any attack on your reputation becomes an attack on me and my family. And believe me, he doesn't want to make an enemy of Quentin O'Malley." The certainty in his voice steadied her. "You would do this? Marry me tonight, knowing what might come?" "I would have married you yesterday if I could have." He touched her cheek gently. "I love you, Josie. Nothing this man says or does will change that." She felt tears well up again, but this time they were tears of relief, of gratitude for this man who stood unwavering beside her. "I love you too. So much." "Then let's go get our boy and make this official." He grinned suddenly. "Samuel's going to think this is better than Christmas." 2 hours later, in the small church lit only by lamplight, Josephine Blackett became Josephine O'Malley. Samuel stood proudly as his father's best man, holding the simple gold band Quentin had been carrying in his pocket for weeks. Preacher Johnson performed the ceremony with Mrs. Johnson and Mrs. Holbrook as witnesses, both women dabbing at their eyes as the couple exchanged vows. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Preacher Johnson declared. "You may kiss your bride." Quentin drew Josie close, his kiss a promise of protection, of partnership, of a love that would weather whatever storms came their way. When they turned to face their small audience, Samuel launched himself at them both, his arms encircling their waists. "Are you my mother now?" he asked Josie, his eyes shining with hope. She knelt to his level, her heart so full it seemed it might burst. "If you'd like me to be, yes. I would be honored to be your mother, Samuel." His answer was to throw his arms around her neck, hugging her tightly. "I knew you would stay forever," he whispered in her ear. "I wished on that firefly we caught, and it came true." Over the boy's head, Josie met Quentin's gaze, seeing in his eyes the same joy that filled her own. They had formed a family in the most unexpected of ways, brought together by a child's wish and a love that had blossomed like wildflowers after rain. The next morning, as the news of their hasty marriage spread through town, James Harrington presented himself at the boarding house, only to learn that Josephine Blackett was no longer in residence. "She's moved out to the O'Malley place," Mrs. Holbrook informed him with evident satisfaction. "Got married last night, she did. To Quentin O'Malley, finest cattleman in the county and not a man to be trifled with, if you take my meaning." James's face darkened with anger. "Married? That's impossible." He stopped himself, aware of Mrs. Holbrook's curious gaze. "I need to speak with her. Where is this O'Malley place?" 5 miles west of town, the innkeeper's wife replied. "But I wouldn't go out there if I were you." Mr. O'Malley doesn't take kindly to strangers turning up uninvited. Ignoring her warning, James hired a horse and rode out to the O'Malley farm later that day. He found Quentin mending a fence, his sleeves rolled up to reveal muscled forearms tanned by the sun. "Mr. O'Malley?" James called, his city accent incongruous in the rural setting. Quentin looked up, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the newcomer. "That's right. And you must be Harrington." James straightened, surprised to be recognized. "I am. I've come to speak with Josephine." "Mrs. O'Malley is busy settling into her new home," Quentin replied, emphasizing the title. He set down his tools and walked toward James with deliberate slowness. "But I'm available to hear whatever you might have to say to my wife." The word wife seemed to unsettle James. "This is a private matter between Josephine and myself. It concerns events in Boston that you know nothing about." "I know everything about them," Quentin countered. "My wife keeps no secrets from me." He stepped closer, using his height to advantage. "Now, I'm going to make this simple for you, Mr. Harrington. You're going to get back on that horse and ride away. You're going to leave Sweetwater Creek and never return. And you're never going to contact my family again." James gave a scornful laugh. "Or what? You'll challenge me to a duel? This isn't some dime novel, O'Malley." "No, it's not," Quentin agreed mildly. "In a dime novel, the villain gets a dramatic death scene. In real life, cattle rustlers and blackmailers just disappear, especially out here, where the land is vast and unforgiving." The threat, delivered in such a conversational tone, seemed to finally penetrate James's arrogance. He took an involuntary step back. "You're threatening me. I'm explaining how things work out here." Quentin's expression hardened. "We take care of our own. Josie is my wife now, which makes her family. There's not a man in this county who wouldn't back me if anything happened to you while you were causing trouble for my family." James glanced around, suddenly aware of how isolated they were, how far from the laws and protections of civilization. "I could go to the authorities." "You could," Quentin agreed. "But then you'd have to explain why you're in Sweetwater Creek when there's a warrant for your arrest in Boston." "Yes," he added, seeing James's surprise, "we've telegraphed east. Seems the authorities are quite interested in your whereabouts." The blood drained from James's face. "You're bluffing. Try me." Quentin's voice was steel now. "You have two choices, Harrington. Ride out of here and never look back, or face what's coming for you. But either way, you're leaving my family alone." For a long moment, the two men stood facing each other, the city swindler and the frontier cattleman, representatives of two worlds that could never coexist. Then James turned abruptly, mounting his horse with less grace than he would have liked. "This isn't over," he declared, though the threat sounded hollow even to his own ears. "It is for you," Quentin replied. He watched, impassive, as James rode away, not moving until the horse and rider were merely a dust cloud on the horizon. When he turned back toward the house, he found Josie standing on the porch, a rifle in her hands. "I heard voices," she said as he approached. "Was that him?" Quentin nodded, taking the rifle from her and setting it aside. "He won't be bothering us again." "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be." He wrapped his arms around her. "Men like Harrington are cowards at heart. He won't risk facing real consequences for his actions." Josie leaned into his embrace, the last of her fear ebbing away. "Thank you for standing by me. For believing in me." "Always," he promised, kissing the top of her head. "That's what family does." From inside the house came the sound of Samuel's voice, calling for them. Josie smiled up at her husband. "Speaking of family, I believe your son is impatient for us to join him. He wants to show me where to plant the garden come spring." "Our son," Quentin corrected gently. "And he's right, it's time to start thinking about the future." Hand in hand, they walked into the house, their home, where Samuel waited, his face alight with plans and dreams for their life together. Outside, the sun dipped toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. A new chapter was beginning for the O'Malley family, one filled with promise and hope and the certainty of love that would endure through whatever challenges lay ahead. In the years that followed, the story of how Josie had helped Samuel catch a firefly and how Quentin had declared she was better than wishes became a family legend, told and retold on summer evenings when the tiny lights danced once more in the gathering darkness. It was a reminder of how their family had begun with a small moment of kindness, a child's wonder, and a love that had proven stronger than the shadows of the past. And as for James Harrington, he was never seen in Sweetwater Creek again. Rumors circulated that he had been apprehended in Denver and returned to Boston to face justice, though no one in the O'Malley household much cared to follow the story. They were too busy living their own tale, one of a schoolteacher who had found her true home, a cowboy who had rediscovered joy, and a boy whose wish upon a firefly had somehow, miraculously, come true.